Hi everyone, I am Adolfo Neto, a professor at the Federal University of Technology, Paraná, and this is the Professor Adolfo Neto podcast. In this podcast, I interview professionals from the field of computing and related areas. Today, I welcome Brittany Johnson-Matthews to the show. Brittany is an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science at George Mason University, Fairfax, Virginia. She's a researcher in software engineering and directs the Inspired Interdisciplinary Software Practice Improvement Research and Development Lab. It's very difficult for a Brazilian to say all that. Brittany, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for having accepted my invitation.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Very excited.
Okay, so Brittany, before talking about ethics in software engineering, which is the subject of our podcast, let's get to know you a bit better. I see here that you have a bachelor's degree in computer science from the College of Charleston. By the way, I visited that campus many years ago when I was in the US for 1 year, and it's a very beautiful campus. But what sparked your interest in computer science?
Great question. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here. So and I don't know how many people in the audience will actually be familiar with this platform, but I got interested in computer science via the platform MySpace. And so I had a MySpace account just like everyone else did when I was in high school, and you could customize the pages. And you could do that at various levels. You could just import a template, or if you knew how to get into what I now know is code, you could actually modify those templates to make them, look how you want them to look. And so at the time, I didn't know that was programming or computer science. But as I got into later into high school and going towards college, I took a programming class, connected the dots, and I guess I got to college. I was like, this is fun. I like this. Let's just do it. So I declared my major in that first year and never looked back.
Okay, and after that, you decided to pursue a PhD in computer science. The title of the dissertation was A Tool, Miscommunication Theory and Adaptive Approach for Supporting Developer Tool Use at North Carolina State University, Raleigh, where we met many years ago. But first, what motivated you to PhD after a bachelor's degree?
A large part of it was my mentor. So in my first year actually of undergrad, I was introduced to a faculty member who does research. And he gave me an opportunity that allowed me to do kind of hands-on work related to computing, which was very different than some of the courses. I was at a liberal arts university. So College of Charleston is a liberal arts university. So it wasn't a super technical program. And so he gave me this opportunity and I enjoyed it a lot. And he was like, if you like this, something you might think about is going for a PhD. And I was like, I don't know what that is or what that even means. But he, informed me, gave me some insights, and I ended up applying. I think I realized pretty early that I didn't want to be a developer. And I think that also played a large part in the motivation to do the PhD, as he explained the opportunities that provided for me in my career.
Okay, but after you finish a PhD, you can decide to pursue a career in academia or in industry. Why did you decide? Because I know that after your PhD, you did a postdoc and then you got a job at George Mason. Why did you decide to go to academia?
Great question. I think there's a lot of pieces there. I don't think I decided until fairly late in my journey, honestly. I think, like I said, after undergrad, I knew I didn't want to be a developer. I didn't want to sit at a desk writing code all day, or at least that was my perception of what a developer would be. And so I knew that wasn't for me. I found that I enjoyed problem solving. I enjoyed the creative aspects of research, and I enjoyed working with others. And from my understanding and getting experience with other faculty and kind of getting through my postdoc, that is the space where I get to do those things. I get to do them freely and guided by my own desire, passion, and of course funding. But it felt like the right opportunity for me to bring my strengths to the table while also getting to do things that I'm passionate about.
And now let's talk a bit about ethics in software engineering. First, how do you define ethics?
That is such a great question. And I want to start by saying I think that what ethics is or what it means in the context of computing has been evolving. And I think it will likely continue to evolve as we think more concretely about what is acceptable and what is not. But I think if I had to broadly describe or define what I think ethics is, it's decision making around what is acceptable or not acceptable in a given context. And I think, we can talk more obviously about what that might mean in software engineering, but if I had to define it broadly, I think that's what it is.
And can you give us some examples of lack of ethics in software development? I will start an example that it's from my past as a student many years ago. I'm older than you, and there were some students that they were intern in companies, and they had to program the system to hide some money that the company received so that the company paid less taxes.
Oh
So
my gosh. Wow. Yes. That is definitely an example. But I would like to point out that I think ethics or lack of ethics in the context of software engineering, because I want to point out that sometimes it's not intentional. Right. I think the lack of ethics can be intentional in these type of situations. I don't know if you've heard of the example of the emissions test scandal, where just a decision that was made in the code made it so that they would pass the emissions test when the test was being run. So like things like that are fairly intentional or feel that way, right? And so that for sure I think points to examples of lack of ethics. But I think some of it can be also unintentional in a sense that just by not having enough intentionality around assessing impact, right? Broader than performance, broader than accuracy, but thinking about some of the broader impacts of the technology that we develop. So the big things around bias that have emerged with AI-driven technology, and how ubiquitous that's becoming. I think things like that are typically not intentional, but because we don't have enough intentionality around investigating those aspects of our systems, then we end up, disseminating these technologies that have these unintentional side effects.
could, would it be an example of an intentionality? It's a very recent example where the Google image creator with AI, I don't know the name, I believe now it's Gemini, but it can change in time. It created image of Nez people which were black or women. Would it be such an example?
Yeah, so I feel like the intentionality aspect I think about is, so as software engineers, it is a common and expected practice to validate your systems, right? Validation comes in various forms. There's formal validations, there's more human-centric validations. So we do a lot of these things already. I think the lack of intentionality comes from not realizing perhaps that how robust our evaluations aren't just about, again, things like performance and accuracy, and even things like privacy, which we've gotten really good at integrating into the considerations that we're making. I think it's an issue of what does it look like to broaden that to then include things like, how do I test to make sure my software isn't doing something unexpected towards a certain group, right? And what does testing look like to be exhaustive in that way or along that dimension? And so when I say intentionality, I mean thinking more robustly and rigorously about the things that we're already doing to encompass some of these additional concerns.
So I'm before asking the next question, I'm going to talk about a case that happened here in Brazil.
Yes.
This year. There was a guy watching a soccer game in the stadium, and then the police arrived and arrested him. And he was innocent. Why did they arrest him? Because the facial recognition system in the stadium thought that he was a criminal. So my question is, what responsibilities do software engineers have in ensuring their algorithms do not perpetuate bias or discrimination? Because as you might expect, in this case, the guy was black.
Yes, yeah, and unfortunately, not the only example of something like that happening. So no, it's absolutely an unfortunate current side effect of kind of how ubiquitous these AI technologies have become, without us fully understanding those types of the potential for those types of things to happen. So I think that the responsibility, and I do also want to preface this with, I think the responsibility is very much split at this stage between practitioners and researchers, because I feel like a lot of things about the landscape of technology, how it's being used, the impact it's having, and what we could even do about that, I think a lot of those questions are still unanswered. And so I feel like there, and this is me getting on my soapbox a little bit, but the synergy between research and practice, right? We need to find that synergy so that we can, as researchers, explore the potential for support that can help practitioners, right, make these considerations without worrying about the things that they are inevitably going to worry about, such as their productivity, such as, you know, maintaining their job and pleasing the organizations that they work for, right? There's a lot of levels to this. And so I feel like the responsibility on the software engineer side is to be open and willing to be intentional about these considerations, but they need the support. And I think, you know, us as researchers, we can help amplify the various considerations and support that is out there, and help them make decisions around how to best implement those things in practice.
And do you think that this concern with ethics should be in the beginning of a software project, or could it be added later?
I really feel like it could go either way, and I think that we need support at both ends. I think we need to be able to facilitate those considerations at the front end when we're thinking about design, when we're thinking about architecture, when we're thinking about you know, the various stakeholders who are involved, and who needs to be in explicit consideration when we're building the thing. But then I also think it's nice to have that back end support where I've built the thing and I need to know, is it meeting the requirements that I've set, right? Is it actually doing the things I need to do, and is it going to have the impact generally that I would expect for it to have, and more importantly, not have the negative impacts that I wouldn't want it to have. So I think that yeah, I think both ends is super important.
And I remember having read a book called Weapons of Mass Destruction by Cathy O'Neill, and I remember, if I might be wrong, but she says that one way to guarantee that the software is ethical is to do a kind to hire a company that checks, oh, everything is okay here, or it seems to be okay. Is that a way to for a company that already has a software that is in production?
I definitely think outsourcing is always a good consideration, because I'm learning even in my own research efforts that there are organizations, there are groups that are already very focused and targeted at understanding the populations that we're serving, as well as thinking about the engagement that they're having with it. Because I think a big part of it is we need the trust to be there, both from the end user and from the engineer, to facilitate the ability for us to actually better understand how our software may be impacting our end users. So I definitely think when there are opportunities, I think it's very important to bring in those who have experience doing it, to help you understand how to best apply it. Because I do think ethics also, if I didn't mention it, is very contextual. So what that means and what those considerations look like, I think vary. And so being intentional and focused and scoped, I think, is an important aspect to realizing it in practice.
And of course, we could talk about this subject for hours. For instance, we did not discuss accountability for software developers, at least not in depth. Those software developers that write unethical software. I suggest to people who are interested that they go to your homepage. It has lots of resources. There are many links there. And my final question about this topic is, if someone wants to develop more ethically minded software, where or how can they start learning?
Absolutely. I obviously have to start with a shameless plug around some of the efforts that I've been involved in myself as well as my lab. I'm co-editor of a column for IEEE software called SE and Ethics. The whole point of that column is to talk about the state of ethics in software engineering, any solutions that are happening, problems that need solutions. So it's a great column for both researchers and practitioners who are very interested in ethical decision making. So want to plug that. I think research there are quite a few researchers who are really trying to glean practical insights into ethics and practice, what that means, what tool support looks like, what's available to kind of help facilitate the search and selection process for practitioners. So I think, although I realize reading research papers, it maybe isn't at the top of software engineers list, but I think, there's a lot of recent works that really provide useful insights into considerations that are being made and that could be being made in practice. And then even in open source, GitHub, I've found in some of my recent efforts have a lot of communities and organizations that are very focused on explicitly tool support for ethical considerations. And so, having that intentionality is step one. Once you have it, the resources are there. I think it's just a matter of having time, I imagine, to get through them and find what's best suited for you.
Is there any conference or where people that are interested in those topics gather?
Interestingly enough, I'm just learning that there are quite a few venues. I think a lot of the ones that I'm most familiar with are more at the workshop level. So I've noticed that there have been a lot of workshops and gatherings like that that are centered on ethics and fairness. I recently became aware of a conference, AI Ethics and Society, which is it seems like a very broad conference that's interested in those intersections of those three broader topics. So there's definitely platforms. I would love to say that I would love to see more. I would love to see more platforms that are specifically focused on ethics in computing and what that means for the modern landscape of technology. But there are some out there.
Okay, I'm a heavy user of Twitter now. X, I shouldn't be, but I'm still am, and I'm also on Mastodon. And sometimes there are people that discuss these topics. And for instance, there is a Brazilian Nina da Hora and Tim Quebru. I believe there are some people
Yes.
there. They're still active.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
if you do research on other topics besides ethics in software engineering, can you summarize those topics and explain what people who want to do a PhD with you can do?
Absolutely. So my lab is generally interested in interdisciplinary research and development. We really want to understand the state of practice in terms of how we're building technology, how we're innovating, what are we already doing, which we aim to use as foundations to facilitate the integration of additional support and interventions that can help practitioners both build equitable technology, but also still feel satisfied and fulfilled in their jobs and not like it's just becoming a checklist of considerations without any satisfaction coming from that. But I do also want to point out or bring up some of the more recent efforts where we're also trying to get more understanding from the end user perspective. Particularly from historically marginalized groups, Black, Indigenous, people of color, persons with diverse needs, disabilities, really interested in their perspective on their engagement with tech and how we can use some of those insights to perhaps facilitate better pipelines towards more equitable innovations.
Great. And if those people, for instance, sometimes we have Brazilian students here that want to do a PhD in the US. Do you have scholarships when you have a funded project?
Yeah, so I think I do have some funding for a project right now that's especially interested in engaging marginalized communities in tech and better understanding those interactions. So that's a big one that I'm pushing forward and going forward, we'll have funding for students. The department thankfully provides great funding for first years. So if you're looking and thinking about going into a PhD, we do provide funding upfront regardless, even in the summers, which I think is top tier. I'm so excited they started doing that. And I do want to note that in terms of experiences you would get in my lab, I like to emphasize the full spectrum or the full pipeline of innovation. And so we do a lot of empirical work. to ground and facilitate and even motivate innovation. And so we do build tools, we build systems, we build interventions, but we're building them with foundations that are based in practice or based in needs of those that are building technology.
Great. And for those that don't know it, Fairfax is very close to Washington, D.C., which is a beautiful city. I don't know if Fairfax, if it's also beautiful, but Washington, D.C., I know.
It's beautiful, but I think people come here for DC for sure.
And my last question, which is one I have been asking all my interviewees, is on the subject of learning. In the field that you are, I know that you have to be up to date with things that are happening, and most of those things take some time to be on academic papers. So how do you stay updated with the news in your field? Books, blogs, podcasts, YouTube, academic papers, video courses, MOOCs, what else?
Great question. It's funny because if you had asked me this before I got deep into my tenure track career, I probably would have told you 5 or 6 different things that I use. But if I'm being honest, I don't have as much time as I used to explore new things. And so I rely on things like Twitter notifications, X notifications. As you're saying, I don't engage on it a whole lot, but I feel like I've built enough interaction where it sends me relevant posts when they're posted. My students actually are now, you probably can relate to that. They are my knowledge sources. I learned about new papers. I learned about new tools, new surveys. I learned about the Stack Overflow Developer Survey from one of my students. I didn't even know that was a thing that was happening. So I think those are big for me in terms of being proactive, at least, and as much reading as I can, which fortunately I get to do still, even as a faculty member.
Thank you, Brittany, for sharing your experiences and insights with my audience. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Just want to thank you again. This has been a great opportunity. Thank you for giving me a platform to talk about this important issue. For those who are interested in this topic and want to talk more, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always looking for collaborators, especially in industry, because our lab is aimed at practice. So we want to help you. So thank you again.
Thank you again, Brittany. A big thank you to all our listeners for joining us today. We appreciate your time and attention. Until next time, goodbye. If you are curious and ready to take your Elixir language skills to the next level, check out my affiliate link to the ELX Pro course in the episode description.